Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Weekend Edition. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Licciardello.
This week, Elon Musk is backing away from starting a rival party to the Republicans and the Democrats. I'll talk to the author of a book about the role of third parties in American politics and what impact they've had.
I'm going to look at all those wars that Trump claims to have ended, plus the latest ructions at the Federal Reserve. But first,
the US Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, the public health agency that played a key role in combating the COVID pandemic, is in turmoil this week.
Some breaking news just into us now. We are learning the newly installed director of the CDC is leaving the agency, according to the health department, who posted on X. Susan Monarez is no longer director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We thank her for her dedicated service to the American people.
That came as news to Monarez, whose lawyers say that she hasn't resigned and she hadn't been officially fired from the CDC at that point, despite falling out with Health Secretary Robert Kennedy. They also issued a statement accusing Secretary Kennedy of, quote, weaponising public health for political gain and putting millions of American lives at risk by purging health officials from government. A number of other senior CDC officials have quit this week in protest after Kennedy restricted access to the next round of COVID vaccines. Kennedy, of course, is a long-time vaccine skeptic, peddling unscientific conspiracy theories and falsely linking vaccines to autism in children without any evidence. The resignations and sackings come after a particularly bad few weeks at the CDC.
Tonight, authorities revealing the identity of the suspected killer after a shootout near Emory University and the Centers for Disease Control. One DeKalb County police officer killed in the gunfire.
This officer responded to the call as he was trained to do. And during that incident, he received gunfire and he lost his life in this incident.
That gunman was an anti-vaxxer who reportedly blamed the COVID-19 vaccine for making him depressed and suicidal, which is why he targeted the CDC. Meanwhile, the Health Secretary and former environmental lawyer Robert Kennedy claims he's able to diagnose complex medical conditions just by looking at a passing child.
I know what a healthy child is supposed to look like. I'm looking at kids as I walk through the airports today, as I walk down the street, and I see these kids that are just overburdened with mitochondrial challenges, with inflammation. You can tell from their faces, from their body movements, and from their lack of social connection. And I know that that's not how our children are supposed to look.
It sounds compelling, but an actual doctor, Angela Rasmussen, a virologist, replied to that, saying, scientists here, mitochondria do not present challenges to faces, movements or social connections. Maybe those kids just don't like you because you're staring at them like a creep who wants to give them measles. Ouch. But I play that clip, Chaz. That was in Texas at a health forum yesterday, which it presents a pretty stark example of Robert F. Kennedy's belief in his own knowledge that actual medical doctors say is bunkum. It is completely untrue, as is so much of what he says about what he believes to be the dangers of vaccines generally. And that is, I guess, at the heart of all of this, because Susan Monarez, even though she was seen as a potentially quite compliant head of the CDC, somebody who will do what she's told by Kennedy and Trump, she ultimately pushed back and she's out after less than a month. A month ago, she was being confirmed by the United States Senate, and now she's gone.
Yeah, I think first of all we should just explain what RFK's done, what this is all about. It's not that he stopped people getting the COVID vaccine. What he has done is erected all kinds of hurdles that you need to show you have some kind of condition, which, look, everyone's got one of these conditions. When you have a look at the list of conditions, they go forever. They've made it a very low bar, but it's a bar you have to clear. Whereas before, I mean, the government was throwing the vaccines at you before.
Right.
Now you need to not just go out of your way to get a vaccine, but you need to work hard. You need to go to the doctor. You need to have several appointments. It's a trial.
Yeah.
The result of this is no one's going to get the vaccine.
Yeah.
And that's a concern.
And that combined with the misinformation and that the good advice is being taken off the CDC's website, being replaced by poor advice. Thousands of CDC staff have been sacked. Senior officials, members of advisory panels, experts on vaccines, they've all been sacked as well. So this is a purge. And yeah, you're right. I mean, when Kennedy said that if you want to get a vaccine, you can, as you say, technically you can, but unless you're over 65, it is going to be a lot harder. And as we know, the harder you make these things, the more people, even if they believe in vaccines, are going to be less likely to get them.
Which is so much the way Kennedy operates. He says it's all about freedom and all about choice, but really it's his choice.
Yeah.
And he's sacking people when they show him any kind of lip whatsoever. The fact that the CDC is going to have, 5 senior officials now all gone at the same time, who are they going to be replaced by? Because Monarez barely got confirmed herself. The Democrats were concerned about her, and she couldn't last a month. So who's Kennedy going to replace her with that can get confirmed?
And the first CDC director that was nominated by President Trump, Monarez was acting in the role from the start of the Trump administration, and she was going along to get along. Trump and Kennedy wanted to nominate and get confirmed by the Senate a former Republican congressman from Florida, Dave Weldon, who is an anti-vaxxer, who is a falsely linking vaccines to autism in children kind of guy. That was too much for the likes of Bill Cassidy in the Senate, a Republican who is also a doctor and knows that a lot of this is guff. So they blocked him. Monarez went through, but you're right. I mean, it's going to be very, very difficult to get somebody, and I'm sure Susan Monarez must have been thinking about this as well. If I go, because she was called on to resign after a meeting with Kennedy on Monday. They said, quit. And she said, I'm not going to quit. You're going to have to fire me. And then she said, well, you can try and fire me, but the president needs to fire me. So the White House has now confirmed she's gone. But this is going to be tangled up in legal disputes as well as the problem of getting another, at least acting CDC director.
And to be fair, she did also go behind his back to try and work through the other senators as well, which he probably didn't appreciate the politicking, but whatever.
And he's going to be dragged before the Senate next week, and Bernie Sanders has got to be in his bonnet about this. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
So on and on and on. But look, why restrict yourself, John, to 1 sacking when you can have 2? In this case, Trump sacked a Federal Reserve governor as well, Lisa Cook. Cook was appointed by Biden in 2022, and if she survives this controversy, she's due to step down in 2036. But Trump says that Cook may be removed at his discretion for cause, and he thinks he's got that cause because the American people, you see, must have full confidence in the honesty of the Federal Reserve, and in light of what Trump calls her deceitful and potentially criminal conduct in a financial matter, that people cannot have that confidence. In fact, Trump says he doesn't have confidence in her integrity either. Harsh. What Trump's referring to are allegations that Cook lied on her mortgage applications to obtain fraudulently favourable terms for her loans. I would have thought Trump would respect that. But anyway, this is his evidence. Documents showing that Cook took out 2 mortgages on 2 properties in a couple of weeks. And the documents for each include a promise that Cook intended for that property to be her principal residence for 1 year. And also, one of them was briefly put up for rent within that year. Okay, so that's what they've got. What they don't have is any proof that Cook knew those promises were being made, that she intended to break those promises, that she obtained better interest rates because of those promises. In short, that it was actually fraud and not just a mistake. Also, the DOJ has not only not convicted her of what would be a federal crime if it were true, but they haven't even charged her. Also, a close look at her documents shows that the promise was for both properties to be her principal residence, which is not the same as her primary residence. You can have more than one principal residence, you see, especially if you work in a different state from where you normally live, which Cook did. So these are pretty threadbare allegations, which, by the way, Cook hasn't even had the chance to respond to before she was fired. And, you know, they're supposed to be very strongly evidenced because the Supreme Court this year made it quite clear the president likely doesn't have the authority to fire Federal Reserve governors without a good reason. They said the Federal Reserve is a uniquely structured quasi-private entity that follows in the distinct historical tradition of the first and second banks of the United States. I have no idea what that means, but I presume it means hands off. That's certainly how Lisa Cook interpreted it. And she replied with, President Trump purported to fire me for cause when no cause exists under the law, and he has no authority to do so. I will not resign. I will continue to carry out my duties to help the American economy. So there's a standoff, like Monarez again. Was she fired or not? And why do we even care? 2 reasons. 1, because the entire economy might depend upon it. You see, 12 people decide interest rates in America. The 7 Federal Reserve governors and 5 regional Fed presidents are on a board together. Trump has already appointed 2 of those governors. He's currently appointing a 3rd. If he replaces Cook, that means he will have picked 4 of the 7 governors. And it's those governors who actually reappoint the 5 regional Fed presidents. They do it in February next year. In other words, if Trump replaces Cook, and he does go full MAGA, the MAGA governors could pick MAGA regional Fed presidents, and by February next year, Trump could fully control the Federal Reserve. That would be the end of the Fed's independence. Trump could then zero out interest rates like he wants to. The market could go crazy, and America could be in serious strife. That's one reason to care. The second reason to care is how these allegations came to light. There's this fellow here, Trump acolyte Bill Pulte. He's in charge of the Housing Finance Agency, and he somehow got his hands on these private records of Lisa Cook's, and he tweeted all about it, asking, how can this woman be in charge of interest rates if she's allegedly lying to help her own interest rates? Suspiciously, this is not the first time he's done this kind of thing. Pulte pulled exactly the same trick last month with California Senator Adam Schiff and with New York Attorney General who sued Trump, Letitia James, before that. All 3 of them are Democrats. And Adam Schiff is in no doubt as to what he thinks is going on with these allegations.
They're patently false, and the president knows it. In the housing agency, president's person, Pulte, knows it. He's essentially doing the president's bidding against me, against Letitia James, against this person on the Federal Reserve. Mortgage is their new weapon to go after their critics.
Now, in Schiff's case, Pulte somehow got his hands on Schiff's documents through an Inspector General's document request. Weird. That's a process that former Inspector Generals have described as, from beginning to end, highly irregular. And they also said it is extremely unusual for the response to any Inspector General document request to go to the head of the agency rather than back to the Inspector General. I have never heard of that, they said. They also said it was unprecedented. So, John, are these documents being obtained illegally? Is Bill Pulte working down an enemies list for Trump? And did Trump ask him to do all this? Those questions could lead to a potentially massive scandal in about 6 months' time, potentially while America's economy is imploding. Interesting times.
Yeah, it certainly is. Look, it's possible that the orders came from the top, but Bill Pulte, like a lot of other Trump appointees, he knows what Trump wants. He knows Trump's enemies and the people that if he goes after them in whatever capacity he can in his particular role, is going to make Trump happy. We've seen Tulsi Gabbard do it, we've seen Kash Patel do it, we've seen Pam Bondi do it. Trump doesn't need to be there saying, go after my enemies, here's the list. Maybe he's dumb enough to have done that, but we just don't know. A few things we do know. Yeah. These are, as you say, allegations. Unproven, untested, uncharged allegations.
Unresponded to.
And she's denied that she did anything irregular here. And this is all from when she was kind of commuting to a university job before she was on the Reserve Bank Board of Governors in any event. When she was appointed to the Reserve Bank Board of Governors, some people in Trump's orbit, some mainstream Republicans, opposed her confirmation because Lisa Cook is the first African-American woman to serve on the Fed Reserve Board of Governors. They saw her as a diversity hire. They questioned her qualifications in a way that many believed, frankly, they would not be questioning were she not a black woman. But they did anyway. That's why he's going after her, some would argue. And then, of course, it is about the independence of the Fed, like with the Bureau of Labour Statistics. He doesn't like the way the Fed is going about its business, doesn't like what they're not lowering interest rates and so on. So this is a really interesting case as to how this plays out. A little different to the Susan Monarez case, because Susan Monarez as a Senate-confirmed appointee of Trump. She did serve at the discretion of Donald Trump. So, yeah, look, she's lawyering up as well, but it could well be that Lisa Cook's a lot harder to get rid of than Susan Monarez. Either way, they share lawyers because Mark Said and Abby Lowell are representing both of them. And potentially a lot more besides, because there are a lot of thousands of people literally have been sacked from various agencies as a result of Doge and the various purges that agency heads have embarked upon.
The really interesting thing about this as well, there's so many interesting things, is that the Supreme Court, they've bent over backwards to help Trump as much as they can this year. Really, they really have. Yeah. They've essentially drawn only one bright line. Don't mess with the Fed. And Trump immediately went and messed with the Fed. So it'll be interesting to see if the Supreme Court have any standards at all that they won't break if Trump pushes them hard enough.
Every now and then, John Roberts takes a stand. Not as many stands and not as soon as some people would hope, but every now and then he does. So yes, one of the other questions that we wait to get answered in this particular case.
Indeed. Now, earlier this week, you might have seen this almost North Korean level of sycophancy.
And there's only one thing I wish for. That Nobel Committee finally gets its act together and realizes that you are the single finest candidate since the Nobel Peace, this Nobel Award was ever talked about, to receive that reward. Beyond your success is game-changing out in the world today. And I hope everybody one day wakes up and realizes that.
Yeah, oh yes, marvellous. At least he could have gotten Nobel correctly, underscoring the fact that Steve Witkoff is a businessman who has no idea about diplomacy. He can't even get the world's largest administrator of peace prizes and various accolades. He can't even get their name right. That bothers me.
Look, while that's all true, the important point is that was embarrassing.
Yeah.
But it's not a one-off. The efforts of Team Trump to perform Nobel-related brown-nosery are truly elite.
You know, a lot of people, Maria, talk about Donald Trump for the Peace Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. I'm thinking that since he's basically taught the world trade economics, he might be up for the Nobel on economics.
Not that Trump would ever be caught engaging in that kind of self-abasement.
I mean, a lot of people say, you know, no matter what I did, because, you know, I'm of a certain persuasion, no matter what I do, they won't give it. And I'm not politicking for it. I have a lot of people that are. I know. I mean, I read the same things as you do. But it would be a great honor, certainly.
No politics.
I haven't seen any politicking.
Look, he says he's not politicking for the Nobel Prize, and yet, according to a Danish newspaper, Trump phoned Norway's finance minister out of the blue last month, wanting to chat about how he can get the Nobel Prize. Sounds a little politicking-esque to me. He obviously didn't get the answer he was looking for, though, so he's since become a little more overt in his hinting.
In the 6 wars that I've settled, I haven't had a ceasefire.
6 wars.
6 wars.
It's a lot of wars, John.
It's a lot of wars.
But not as many wars as he'd solved by the very next day.
I've solved 7 wars. We ended 7 wars. I thought this would be one of the easier ones, and this has turned out to be the toughest one. India, Pakistan, I mean, these were big ones, and also all big ones, and some going for 31, 32 years, one for 35 years. The Congo, think of that, the Congo and Rwanda for 35 years. I got that one done.
Somehow, even 7 solved wars didn't win him the Nobel Prize. So, you know what he had to do then?
I settled 7 wars, and actually, if you think about pre-wars, add 3 more, so it would be 10.
Common mistake to forget the pre-wars.
Pre-wars? Is it like a future crime?
I don't know. Let's just put those pre-wars to one side for 1 second and focus on those 7 wars that Trump solved. You might be wondering, which wars are these exactly?
I was wondering exactly that, yes.
Well, the Dispatch asked the administration, and they did clarify that Trump was referring to conflicts between Thailand and Cambodia, Israel and Iran, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, India and Pakistan, Egypt and Ethiopia, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and during Trump's first term, Serbia and Kosovo. Now, many would just mock that. I know, you never would. No, you never would. But honestly, I don't know what's going on in a lot of those countries I just mentioned, so who knows? And Trump does seem to at least be trying to create peace in the world, even if he's primarily motivated to win a prize. So I thought I should ask foreign policy expert and executive director of the McCain Institute, Dr Evelyn Farkas, what she thinks about Trump's peacemaking. Dr Evelyn Farkas, welcome to Planet America. Now let's go through the supposed 7 wars that Trump claims he's solved. Number 1, Egypt and Ethiopia. Is that a war that Trump has solved?
Well, I don't even think it's a war, so the answer there would have to be no.
Next, Serbia and Kosovo. Is that a war that Trump has solved?
It's also not a war. They don't have, of course, a durable peace in that Serbia does not recognize Kosovo, but that's also not a war.
India and Pakistan. Is that a war that Trump has solved?
So it's debatable whether that was a full-blown war, but certainly it appears that President Trump had some input into the resolution of that conflict.
How about Thailand and Cambodia? Is that a war that Trump has solved?
So again, I don't know whether I'd call it a full-fledged war. The military skirmish or the military action, the operations were halted because of President Trump's involvement, yes.
Israel and Iran. Is that a war that Trump has solved?
Yes, and that one I do consider a full-blown war because they were launching, missiles at one another at their territory for again, over a week, for 12 days. And President Trump's very public demand that they cease firing was met in a fashion that clearly linked them time-wise. And I think neither side has said that President Trump had nothing to do with it. So I think that either side would acknowledge that he had a hand in bringing it to an end.
So we're giving him that one?
We'll give him that one, yes.
Okay, Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Is that a war that Trump has solved?
No, because I think they're still fighting. At least the Rwandan-backed rebels are still fighting, so the war is still ongoing, unfortunately.
And finally, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Is that a war that Trump has solved?
That war came to an end but wasn't completely resolved. It's similar again to Kosovo and Serbia. That war came to an end under the Biden administration, and you have to give the Biden administration credit because they were working really hard to try to bring, again, a final resolution, a peace agreement to the table that both sides would sign. And even President Trump hasn't achieved that, although he was able to broker a really good transit agreement, which should pave the way for a durable war and a real change in the geo-economic dynamics in the region.
So are we giving him joint credit for that one or no credit?
I think you give credit for facilitating peace. And so, I think part of it is the terminology the president uses, but I'll give him credit for trying to really make that peace stick, make the end of the war final in the case of Armenia, Azerbaijan. And that one does look like it can stick in part because of President Trump's actions.
Now, obviously, I'm being a little facetious here, going through the conflicts one by one, but to sum up, how many wars do you think Trump can honestly say that he's solved, and how would you genuinely assess his peacemaking efforts to date?
I mean, I think that he resolved several military skirmishes, again, that don't necessarily come to the level of war. He, mediated in disputes. He did bring the war between Israel and Iran to an end. I think that is important. It doesn't mean that it might not flare up again, but he did succeed there. I would say that he's very effective when he can take quick, decisive action, and when the parties, aren't dug in, or when the parties are probably looking for a way out, when it's not existential to either side that they continue the war. And that's why, of course, the Russia-Ukraine situation is so problematic. President Trump can't bring that to an end just as quickly as he brought the Iran-Israel war to an end.
Okay, let's talk about Ukraine then. In December last year, you wrote of Trump and the Ukraine war. If he could bring the war to a just, durable peace with a security guarantee for Ukraine, that would indeed be Nobel Prize worthy. Do you stand by that? And how do you think he's going there?
I stand by it 100%. And I would say that he has not made progress towards that achievement because he's really let Russia off the hook. He was putting pressure on Russia, which is why President Putin made the suggestion that they meet with one another, that they have a summit, which they then held in Alaska. He knew he had to do something because President Trump had slapped sanctions on India for buying Russian oil and was threatening to slap additional sanctions on other countries for purchasing Russian oil and gas. So the threat was there, but now it's been removed. Russia got a break. First of all, they got a break during the summit. Then they got a break when President Zelensky came to the White House because it stretched out the diplomacy. And as you know, the Russians are still lobbing missiles. I think they killed 14 people yesterday in Kyiv. And it's at the highest levels that Russia has utilized in terms of numbers of munitions and even deaths in the city center in Kyiv. And so it's hardly an achievement for the president that the Russians are continuing their bloody actions against innocent civilians.
How do Trump's peacemaking efforts, in your view, compare to previous presidents?
Well, first of all, he expects his approach is to set deadlines and to expect results, to expect compromise quickly. He also is, of course, very personally involved. Most other presidents have left their teams to work on various aspects of peace agreements and really only come in at the end to finalize, to kind of, watch the signatories pull out their pens and put them to paper. So President Trump kind of approaches it the other way around. He comes in, he says, you guys agree. Once you agree, now, then the teams will work on the details. Oftentimes having a real agreement means you agree on the details. So it's not enough. Even if Putin and Zelensky were to meet and agree on peace, which will never happen unless President Putin is vanquished on the battlefield, and even then he won't go personally and meet Zelensky, he'll send someone. Even if the two sides were to say in front of President Trump, yes, okay, we agree to peace, until you have all the details hammered out and you have a signed document, I think it's not really a done deal.
And finally, Dr. Farkas, how do you feel about Trump's obvious obsession with winning the Nobel Peace Prize? Does it bother you? Or are you happy that he's fixated on a worthy goal?
Look, the Nobel Peace Prize is about peace. I'm happy when any powerful leader, much less the most powerful leader in the world, which is the President of the United States still to this day, when he decides he wants to make peace. I think that's laudable. The problem is that it's not as easy as I think he thinks it is. And it does require an understanding, at least, even if you want to try to ignore the historical and existential forces that drive the sides to continue to fight, in a given conflict. You can really ignore those things at your peril, because ultimately you have to find a way to come up with a compromise where both sides can get something or lose something, again, unless one side is vanquished.
Dr. Evelyn Farkas, thanks for visiting Planet America.
Thank you so much.
Last month, the world's richest man, Elon Musk, announced that he was forming a new political party, the America Party. That, of course, came after leaving the Trump administration in a state of somewhat high dudgeon over their big, beautiful tax and Medicaid cutting bill. At the time, President Trump reacted in more pity than anger.
I am saddened to watch Elon Musk go completely off the rails, essentially becoming a train wreck over the past 5 weeks.
Personality assessments aside, Trump then hit out at the very idea of a new third political party.
They never succeeded in the United States. The system seems not designed for them. The one thing third parties are good for is the creation of complete and total disruption and chaos.
In fact, it's probably not fair to say that third parties have caused complete and total disruption and chaos. If anything, their impact has been rather harder to discern, if not at times negligible. Since the 1860s, either the Republican Party or the Democratic Party has won every presidential election in the United States. Only once, in 1912, when former Republican President Teddy Roosevelt ran as a progressive bull moose, did a third party candidate even come second. The last time a third-party candidate won a single state was former Democrat George Wallace. He was the segregationist governor of Alabama who won 5 southern states and came third in 1968, but he did help to elect the Republican that year, Richard Nixon. In the 1990s, billionaire businessman Ross Perot mounted 2 presidential campaigns, which polls briefly suggested he could just possibly win.
Question really is who do you want in the White House? It's that simple. Now, you got to stop letting these people tell you who to vote for. You got to stop letting these folks in the press tell you you're throwing your vote away. You got to start using your own head.
Well, they did start using their own head because by election day 1992, his support had faded against Bush and Clinton. But he did do better than any third-party candidate since Teddy Roosevelt. Interestingly, Donald Trump himself flirted with being a third-party presidential candidate in the year 2000. He sought the nomination of the party that Ross Perot founded, the Reform Party.
You at all worried about getting credibility as a candidate?
Well, I think the credibility I have is maybe the best. I mean, who else has done what I've done in this sense? And I've done it myself, and I'm very proud of it. And we'll see what happens, Brian.
Well, we did see what happened. He didn't become the nominee. Pat Buchanan did. But here's an example of where the influence persists, because Trump adopted many of Ross Perot's economic populist policies, which he continues to have to this day, with no small dash of the anti-immigrant culture wars exploited by that Reform Party nominee, former Nixon speechwriter Pat Buchanan.
They've taken God and the Bible out of our schools. They've pulled the 10 Commandments off the classroom walls. Now they're after the Boy Scouts, calling them a hate group because they won't let homosexual men be scout leaders. It's time to take our country back from those who are tearing it down. George W. Bush and Al Gore will do nothing. One candidate isn't afraid to fight back. Pat Buchanan. Vote for the third party that puts families first. Vote Buchanan for president.
Since then, various third-party candidates from the Greens, Ralph Nader and Jill Stein, to Libertarian Gary Johnson, have run for president on a third-party platform. And while they haven't won, they may have siphoned some votes away from the major parties, influencing the result. But now Elon Musk has reportedly decided against it. He's going cold on the idea of an America party. According to the Wall Street Journal, Elon Musk instead is considering using some of his vast financial resources to back J.D. Vance if he decides to run for president in 2028. So a big relief for Republicans if that is the case. Well, for more on the role of third parties in American politics, past, present and possibly future, I spoke to Dr Bernard Tamas. He is the author of the book The Demise and Rebirth of American Third Parties, and he's Professor of Political Science at Valdosta State University in Georgia. Bernard Tamas, welcome to Planet America. I wonder, is there anything peculiar to the American political system federally that has seen the major parties dominate almost entirely since the 1860s?
It's true. The United States is much more a clean two-party system than any of the other major democracies in the world. I mean, UK, Australia, Canada, starting in the 1970s, started shifting towards more fragmented party system, and the U.S. largely has not. And it seems like the major issue is actually the way that elections are run here. It comes down to resources, in that it costs billions of dollars to run, to compete against the Democratic or Republican Party, to become actually a strong party. And it's very hard for third parties to actually gain those resources to really challenge them. And that more than anything else, it doesn't help that it's a federalist system where it's 50 different states that they'd have to organize in, and that produces problems. But I would say the primary reason is because it is so incredibly expensive to run campaigns in the United States.
And Bernard, who would you say have been the most consequential third-party presidential candidates over the years, not just in terms of their electoral success, but also the policy or other influence they've had over the major parties?
Well, I think hands down the most important third-party candidate would have been Teddy Roosevelt. We have to go back all the way back to 1912 for this, and his Progressive Party was exceptionally important. And you asked the question the right way. The progressives didn't win many seats. What you have third parties that are emerging now and keep talking about how they're going to win a lot of seats. It hasn't happened, and there's no reason to think it's going to happen. This is not how third parties function. You kind of have to change the definition of what success is. And success is, in fact, to disrupt the political system, to challenge the major parties, and to force them into responding. Basically, it's fear is what drives it. And the progressives were quite amazing about this. They won very few seats, but they pushed the American system to a major era of reform. The political reform, in terms of things like having primary elections, but also significant economic reform that changed the economy and American life. So by far, I would say the progressives were the most important.
Teddy Roosevelt, of course, in that 1912 election came second to Democrat Woodrow Wilson, beating Taft. But was he able to come second purely because he was a former president? He didn't need the money to go out there and raise his national profile. Everybody knew who Teddy Roosevelt was.
Well, it was a well-structured party organization, and it wasn't as expensive if we go back 100 years. This was one of the fundamental changes. It really was in the 1960s that election started getting much more expensive in the U.S., when there was the rise, especially at the congressional level, where they started running what they call candidate-centered campaigns, and where everything got focused on these very localized campaigns, which are terrible for third parties. And to the degree that the third parties tried to imitate that was just a disaster for them. A lot of it was the Progressive Party was not just Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, in many ways it organized on its own, and Teddy Roosevelt became just one of became the major figure in it. So that it's less than an issue of about Teddy Roosevelt or not Teddy Roosevelt. It's more like the issue of television or no television. And again, in America, television is private and it's expensive to get commercials on it.
Looking back through history, Bernard, would you say that there have been any third-party presidential candidates who have changed the result, changed the winner of the presidency? Because from time to time, of course, the major parties have said they have.
I would say that Ralph Nader is an example of where the presidential elections changed from one party, the winner. I don't think that George W. Bush would have won had it not been for a little help from Ralph Nader and a few other factors, obviously, that also played out in Florida. But beyond that, in terms of recent cases over the last half century or so, probably not. I think the Republicans and the Democrats love to point at, Jill Stein cost the Democrats the election, so don't vote for the Greens. Or the Republicans like to look at, say, Ross Perot as taking away that was the only reason they lost to Bill Clinton. But the evidence is mostly against it. Ralph Nader, one reason why he had the effect, he didn't win that many votes. He certainly didn't win anywhere near as many as Ross Perot did, but it just happened to be an incredibly close election. And so for that reason, a few thousand votes in a state here and a state there, and in particular in Florida, that's what pushed it over to the Republican side.
Of course, back in 2016, Bernard, Donald Trump refused to rule out running as a third-party candidate if he was unable to secure the Republican Party's presidential nomination. I wonder, therefore, given the influence that both Ross Perot had on his platform, Pat Buchanan as well, both Reform Party candidates, could we argue that, in fact, Donald Trump in many ways resembles a third-party candidate who just happened to take over the nomination of one of the major two?
Well, actually, you could turn it around a different way, which is that what happened was Ross Perot emerged in 1992. Then this was a time when the Democratic and the Republican parties were both free trade, what people like to refer to as neoliberalism, low tariffs. And Ralph Nader came out, and he was the first one to do what is now the American version of populism. And so Ralph Nader comes and does this. And he brings that forward. He doesn't win, but boy, does he scare the Republicans a lot. By 1994, the Republicans start shifting in this populist direction. And again, there was a fight going on, pulling back and forth within the political party on this, but there was this movement in that direction. Again, away, you are very correct, away from where Ronald Reagan was. Ronald Reagan, for example, was always a strong supporter of immigration. Ronald Reagan was always a strong supporter of free trade. In many ways, Trump is the culmination of this move. And in some ways, you are right. He actually does look like a third-party candidate in the sense that he wasn't, he hadn't been working in the party for 20, 30 years. He came in with a different rhetorical style, but he still climbed his way up within the Republican Party, obviously very quickly, and eventually took over. So I would not say that Donald Trump is a third-party candidate, but it is Donald Trump, and for that matter, Bernie Sanders are both signs. The American public has gotten tired of what we can consider a very kind of standard traditional approach, and has become more and more open to insurgent candidates. So if you can take that one step further, it becomes a real opening for third parties to one or two third parties to actually go with something of the same strategy.
Bernard Tamas, great to talk to you. Thanks for being with us on Planet America.
Good to talk to you.
Now, before we run out of time, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about President Trump's announcement of this year's Kennedy Center Honors for the Arts. And he said at the time that he'd agreed to host the award show himself, and that he had selected 98% of recipients, weeding out what he described as a few wokesters. And we talked at the time about the 70s glam rockers Kiss being one of the honorees. And we said that while the bass player Gene Simmons has been critical of Donald Trump, I also said that the founder and lead singer Paul Stanley was more of a Trump fan. Well, that had Planet viewer Trevor in Brisbane scratching his head because, in fact, it's a lot more complicated than that. Both Simmons and Stanley have been critical of Trump at times, although Gene Simmons, who was a contestant on Trump's Celebrity Apprentice back in the day, supported Trump in 2016 against Hillary Clinton, although he's now changed his mind again. He says that Trump is just out for himself and he got all of the cockroaches to rise to the top. Meanwhile, Paul Stanley has actually been pretty non-committal in his public comments on Donald Trump. He has been critical in the past, certainly of Donald Trump's claims that the 2020 election was being rigged against him. He called that at the time abhorrent. Stanley was then also pretty outraged at the January 6th attack on the Capitol as well. The other KISS member named Paul, though, Paul Ace Frehley, has described himself as a Trump supporter. So that's possibly where the confusion came from. Paul Stanley was conciliatory towards Trump after last year's election, but he doesn't seem to be a glowing fan, which is what I suggested based on reports at the time. So a bit of a conflation of the Pauls, perhaps. We sent Paul Stanley a message this week asking him to characterise his views on Donald Trump for himself, but we haven't heard back. We'll let you know if we do. Meanwhile, another of Trump's Kennedy Center picks is certainly a fan. This is disco icon Gloria Gaynor. She's been revealed this week as a, quote, major MAGA donor. If you consider nearly $22,000 to right-wing candidates and conservative organisations since 2023 to be major. Paul Ace Frehley, by the way, also thinks that Gene Simmons is a, quote, asshole and sex addict. And they're all going to be at the awards together. So all in all, Chaz, this is probably going to be a rather interesting night. Mark that down, 7th of December in your diary. Although by then it could actually be the Trump Kennedy Center Awards. The president saying that it could be renamed in a week or so. Unless he was kidding about that, Chaz. Who knows with this guy?
I got no idea.
Yeah, that is it for another weekend edition of Planet America. We'll be back on ABC News at the same time next week.
And we'll be back with an all-new show on ABC TV on Monday night, right after Media Watch, or anytime you like on ABC, iView, YouTube or Facebook. And don't forget the Pet Podcast. Great listening there. Bye-bye.